Welcome, everyone. My name is Peter Wanders. I'm the president and CEO of Anderson Ranch out here in Snowmass, Colorado. It is an incredibly beautiful fall day, and we are excited to have everyone gathered. I wish we were all here on campus. Addoley, I wish you were here with us, but this virtual approach is going to be our communications for what looks like the near future. Excited to bring everyone back to campus. We have had art making on campus all year, so we are happy about that. There are facilitated studios going on now, so the kilns are out, people are painting. It's really great to be a part of that community, and we look forward to ramping back up to full speed again, hopefully when things feel safe next summer. If you are in this area, please come by. There is an outdoor sculpture exhibition. Maybe too wittily called the Sculpturally Distanced exhibition. But we're also really excited to continue to offer virtual workshops, and these lectures, these salons take place once a month. And we look forward to telling you more about those. Liz will catch you up on the next one at the end of this program. Addoley Dzegede is joining us today. She will be in conversation with Liz Farrell. I will pass over to you, Liz. We're excited to hear this conversation. And Addoley, we're really excited to have you join us. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much, Peter. And Addoley, welcome. We're so glad to have you here for this virtual art salon. And I know everybody's really excited to hear from you. I wanted to mention that we're thrilled to be offering a soft sculpture workshop taught by you in summer 2021 at the ranch, here at the ranch. So I know you haven't been here yet, so it'll be really exciting to bring on a new faculty member. Before we begin, I want to tell all of our participants that you are welcome to ask questions. We will be speaking for about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll be doing a question-answer period. However, you can type your questions in the Q&A box. There's a Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen. If you scroll down with your cursor, you can see it pop up on the right. You can type questions in at any time, and I will see them. The rest of the audience will not, but I will, and I'll be able to answer those questions for you at the end when we get to that period. So feel free, if a thought comes to mind or you have an idea or a question, please type that in, and I will make sure to do my best to ask all questions. Sometimes we have too many to answer in 15 minutes, but we'll do our best. So, Addoley, your work spans several media, and it's colorful, it's full of pattern and symbolism. So your artist statement says that you investigate notions of belonging, migration and location, and hybrid identities. So could you start by telling us a bit about your background and how you choose your materials and the images that you work with? And I know you need to share your screen, so we'll give you a chance to get that up.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, and I'll enter full screen.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Addoley Dzegede. I grew up in South Florida and I've lived a lot of places since then. Currently I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma in my studio. I'm at the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. And I show this first slide because this is a piece that I made when I was in undergraduate school at Maryland Institute College of Art. And I was thinking a lot about how you have this sense of self, and then as you go out into the world, people ask you questions that make you see the way that they see you. And so a lot of my work has had to do with this. I'd actually, in graduate school, I tried to make a lot of projects where, you know, I was like interested in the gaps between the city and county line in St. Louis, and how the sidewalk would end in one place and the road was better in another. But then when people would come to my studio, they were really interested in my identity, and they'd ask me like, where's your name from and where are your parents from? And oh, do you speak your father's language, and all these different kinds of identity questions. And so through my work, I started to see the ways that the interests that people have in my life can play out in my work and allow me to say, to like distill certain messages that I want to. So this first piece I'm showing is the Florida room. And this came about because I went plant shopping with a friend, and all the plants that she was drawn to were the things that I thought of as really plain and ordinary, because I grew up in South Florida and those kinds of plants were just growing in the sand outside my house. And I had found out about these Victorian Wardian cases that were used to take tropical plants out of their homes, and so that people could have them, you know, in their parlors in London. And they're small, like glass and metal cases, and you could maintain the humidity or whatever was needed for that plant. So I was thinking about the way that we take our sense of self with us, and that it's not very apparent, but like inside you have this idea of what's normal. So inside this case, which is about 6 feet tall, is a giant air plant that my friend Laurencia Strauss gave to me. And it's a plant that has roots, but it doesn't need them in order to survive. So I thought of that as a metaphor for the kind of nomadic person that I've become.
So it's almost like it's a portable greenhouse, and it's like a metaphor for a human being nurturing this sort of plant that's moving around and needs its own atmosphere and its own sort of nutrients from home kind of sense. That's the sense I get. Is that sort of what you were thinking about with this?
Yeah, but also at the same time, it's a display meant to show off something that's considered exotic. And
right.
So, you know, there's this like inner outer relationship between how people see it from the outside and the experience on the inside.
Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. So you were going to show these next pieces, and as we look at these, I just wanted to kind of ask a little bit to kind of add to what you're talking about. These flat pieces, they incorporate printmaking and collage and textiles. We're going to look at a lot that do that, and other processes. So you gather materials in various locations and create narrative work that's embedded sort of with the experience of gathering items from the places that you travel. And can you tell us about how you sort of create these narratives and how this process unfolds for you? We have a lot of artists in the audience, and we really love to kind of hear about process and how that merges with the content that you're kind of trying to get out there.
So I've been attending artist residencies every year, sometimes 2 a year, since 2013. And it started off as just, you know, when you're traveling, I mean, at least when I'm traveling, I don't want to take a bunch of stuff. And so I would take the most basic things like a knife, X-Acto knife, a ruler, a cutting mat, and then allow myself to find materials in the place. And because I was doing that, the character of the work for each place was different, because naturally, like if you're in a seaside village in Iceland, you find like discarded rope and fish bones on the shore and things like that, it's going to have a certain aesthetic, rusted nails.
Right.
And so that I'm also interested in the history of places. And sometimes I become like entirely fascinated with what I find in a place, but other times I kind of reflect inward, and sometimes it's a merging of the two, where I reflect on who I am in that place. And these two works here are one of those moments where I was reflecting more inward and thinking about my family, and it's from a series called The Constellation of My Genealogy, which was mentioned in a poem by a poet, Aaron. And so I was thinking about all the different places that my ancestors came from, and the kind of wild possibility of them meeting and coming together. And, you know, there are different histories coming together in not one person, I have 3 siblings, but coming together in me. So on the left is my grandmother. She worked at the Ohio Bell Company during World War II. And so my grandparents on that side have this, you know, like they were first generation immigrants from Europe. Their parents came from Europe. And then on the left is a portrait of my parents. that was taken in a photo studio in Togo in it's in the title, 1971.
Wow. Okay.
And so a lot of this I've seen through the lens of fabric, because for instance, my grandmother's name was Rose. And so the pattern is a rose pattern. And then with my parents, I have I've used the motif that's used a lot in commemorative textiles, where it's an oval and then the commemorated person is inside the center. And then there's like a crown on top. And then when I was at the fabric workshop and museum as an apprentice in 2015, we each had to print, we got the privilege of printing.
I know, I understand that language.
Yardage of fabric that we designed. And my pattern, I decided to go and walk around the different neighborhoods that were surrounding the museum because it was pretty central in Philadelphia. And so I collected motifs from different neighborhoods and put them together, but I made the color palette reflect one that I commonly saw coming up in Dutch wax prints. And so I was interested in the idea that the way that color could disguise something that's so familiar, you know, like one of the patterns is just the bathroom floor at the studio there. But color kind of unified them all together and made them seem like they're from another place.
Interesting it's interesting how much color really affects our sense of recognition and our sense of emotion. And you change the color on something and it really does change the whole meaning of the work. That's a really interesting idea to employ there.
Yeah, someone actually walked past when I was printing it and said, "Oh, is this African pattern?"
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which I thought was really funny. But the pattern's called Here and Elsewhere. So here it is. So it's about 17 different patterns when you include the background, the layers of the background color.
And for those who understand screen printing, can you just explain really briefly a little bit about how you kind of designed this and printed it? It looks like you had some help, and you started to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was a 3-color screen print. So, you have to decide where the colors are going to overlap or if they overlap. And the screens are so big there that you need help. So it was nice to have that kind of collaborative process where everyone helped each other. So I started off by doing a drawing by hand, and then I would scan it into the computer and manipulate it and repeat it and like clean it up a bit. My lights are motion. It starts off all the time. And then, I turned it into a big screen, like each color gets its own screen, and then you line it up and create a process where everything will match up.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful thing for like people who love printmaking to think about how repetition can really become, it's very painterly in some ways, but it's also quite graphic. And I can tell you love repeated sort of multiples as well when we get to the objects, but you love the multiple for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This piece is a collage, and it came about the original intention was I went to Home Depot or a hardware store to get paint samples and just for the colors, and I was going to cut out these shapes because I went to Portugal before I went to graduate school, and I was looking at this building that was really beautiful, and then it had a placard outside, and I was like, I wonder what this building was for. It was right near the shore, and it was like, this is where people were auctioned off for slavery.
Oh, wow.
And so I was thinking about the way that the beauty of these once colonial countries is built on suffering. And so I picked the colors that were that I found in like a tiled building there that I thought were really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I was drawing on top of it the Brooks diagram for how to efficiently pack a slave ship. But then as I was drawing the ships on the colors, I started to read the colors, and I left the colors on there because they had names like Freedom Trail, Luminous Days, Pure Joy, Love Affair, Mayflower Red, Until We Meet Again, like really cheesy ones. But it started to become like really disturbing, the juxtaposition of the titles of the colors with what I was drawing on them. And so I just put them all together.
And that sort of, sorry to interrupt, but that's so intriguing to me. So that evolved as you were working, like through the process. It wasn't something you pre-planned when you started to draw on these.
No, because I originally was going to cut out the ships and then arrange them in kind of these like circular patterns that appear on the tiles to more reflect the tile that I was referencing. But yeah, I just ended up, I was like, this is enough. The way that it already is wanting to be made is enough. This references more of what you said about going to a place and using materials from there.
Yeah.
This is from when I went to Iceland, and I barely brought any supplies, and I didn't know what I was going to do, which I prefer working that way, and I haven't been working that way in a while. But I found a big skein of yarn that someone had left in the closet at the residency. And then I was walking around, and there were all different kinds of flowers and weeds and things like that. And so I was curious about natural dyeing, and I started to experiment. There was like a pot and a burner, so it was perfect. And so I started experimenting with natural dyeing, and every day I would dye a new color, and I came up with like 30 something different colors. And then I took all that yarn back to St. Louis where I was living, and I took a weaving course, and I wove a kente cloth, which is like a traditional Ghanaian fabric. And so I was thinking about like me being in Iceland, walking down the street in a village that has 480 people, and I clearly would stand out, but nobody stared at me. But it was just like this knowing that just walking down the street, it's so obvious that I'm not from there. And so I was taking like the colors of the place and the materials of the place and combining them to make something that had something to do with who I am.
Yeah, and so this gathering process, do you feel like a scavenger? Are you constantly looking for materials in the places that you visit, or does it have, was this specific to this project? Does that make sense?
I don't feel like I constantly am, but I am constantly encountering things that make me want to work with them. Let me see what the next image is. Like, for instance, I found this rope on the ground, and it was near some rusty chain. I had to like untangle it from the chain, and it gave it that rusty color that's kind of at the top. And at the time I had read a book about the history of indigo and how desirable it was. And this desire for it even translates into like, there's a well-known Icelandic dyer who only uses natural dyes that she can get in Iceland. And she includes indigo in that just because the history is like 300 years of usage in Iceland, even though, like indigo doesn't grow there. And so,
right.
And so I was thinking about that in relationship to this plant that was called Northern Dock. And it made that color that the rope is wrapped in. So there's this plant called
yellow.
Northern. Yeah, that yellow.
Okay.
So there's a plant called Northern Dock. I found this rope, basically at a dock. And then I was thinking about this North and South relationship about indigo and how the things that people did to get it, it was one of the biggest spices in the spice trade,
right.
And there were huge plantations where people were enslaved to grow indigo because of the demand and how high it was.
Wow, that's a really beautiful piece and an interesting, merging of color and material. Really beautiful.
Thanks. And then I touched on this a little bit, but a lot of my work recently has been inspired by Dutch wax print history. A lot of people identify this type of fabric with Africa, but it's a Dutch attempt to mimic Indonesian batik that is marketed to Africa and is taken on an African identity through usage, and it's become culturally significant. And this particular pattern is called Happy Family. It's one of the most popular patterns. And it's like meant to say something about the woman who wears it. Like, the hen is central to the whole image, and the rooster is only shown as his head because he's up to no good. And then the chicks are the children, and then the eggs represent the future generations. And so I wanted to create my own batik. And so I taught myself with much difficulty. But yeah, and this was my first piece that I made using the wax resist technique. And it's also called Happy Family.
Can you talk a little bit, this is really stunning, that piece that you created, it's gorgeous. Can you talk a little bit about the wax process, the traditional process, and how you found out how to use it and how that process went for you?
I became friends with an artist in the Netherlands, Sabina Bullock, and she does a lot of research on batik, and she's very knowledgeable. You should follow her on Instagram. But yeah, we became friends on Google Plus, which like nobody used. And then eventually we met in real life, and you know, I spent a year in the Netherlands, and so I got to see her several times, 2018 and 19. And I asked her some questions. What kind of materials can I use for this? And then there's also a website called Dharma Trading that sells dyes, and they have a little bit of information about how to use it. And that's where I got the tool. And I got a grant to buy the materials because I wanted to try this new technique. And basically what it is you draw with hot wax on fabric. And I no longer use this tool because it's so hard. It took me 3 months to make this piece. But now I can make much faster using paint brushes and stamps and other techniques. And I mix it with screen printing now with dye. But basically you draw with hot wax and then you dye the fabric, and everywhere where the wax is, the fabric resists the dye. That's why it's called like a resist technique. And so you boil out the wax and then you're left with, like, for instance, the first color was yellow. And so I dyed the whole cloth yellow. And then when I boiled out the wax, all the places where I had drawn was a white line.
And then you dyed with brown on afterwards? Or
no, this was 3 colors. So this was yellow first, then red, and then blue.
Wonderful. I see. And the mix of the two. That's great. Well, thank you for telling us that. I think that's really important to kind of understand when looking at these wax pieces.
Yeah, and it ended up being, the point of it was to be part of this installation called Everybody You Know Is Here, which was a conversation with my mother to ask her, you know, she'd never been outside of the US. She grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and she decided to join the Peace Corps and went to Ghana, where she met my father. Oh. And I was like, what makes you decide to, you know, you've never been out of the US and you go all the way to Ghana? Yeah. So there's a video with the same title, Everybody You Know Is Here, which you can see on my Vimeo. But basically she's talking about the process and through her childhood and the different steps and the people she met that made her decide to do that.
Wow. And how did you create that sort of doormat with the text?
Just some doormat company where you can just type in what you want on your doormat.
Right. You just ordered it. That's wonderful. I love it. Okay. I was just curious because I think, you know, artists have so many different ways of creating. You have these very like handmade processes that you seem to be somewhat purist about, right? And you're sort of a purist with the wax, but then you're able to just go online and order another part of the piece. And I think it all works together quite seamlessly. And I'm able to kind of jump from one element of the piece to the next. So that's a really, it must be an interesting process for you to sort of take these different, you know, elements of your work that have a different sort of level of labor and put them together in a way that causes someone to walk in and have a sort of more visceral response that sort of takes in the whole piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted there to be different points of access, and also the main thing was the video, but I wanted to draw people into the video. And the format of it is, my mother didn't want to be on screen. So I had this footage that I had taken of these snails crawling around when I did a residency in Portugal. And I didn't know what to do with it. But then she started talking about how she did research with snails when she was doing a research fellowship in college. And then I was like, this is perfect, because a lot of the metaphors could be used, you know, for the snails, like she was talking about feeling depressed and turning into herself, you know, and then there's a snail that just like goes back in its shell, or there's 2 snails interacting when she's talking about meeting people.
And she went into the Peace Corps following college. And what did she do? What was her, did she teach?
Yeah, she taught biology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So this is a piece that I like totally found this buoy in the Icelandic village where I was doing the residency I mentioned earlier. at Ness, and it was all shattered like this, and all around it was bullet casings, which I thought was really strange. It's like this very peaceful, isolated village, but like people maybe are so bored that they go and shoot up the junkyard. So I coated the inside with indigo, and the outside I copper leafed, and then the rope is found. It's really like beautiful rust stained rope that I found there.
Amazing.
And then I used to work after graduate school. I worked at the St. Louis Art Museum at the front desk. And during my breaks, I would go to the basement because that's like the place that most people don't go. And so it's very peaceful. And there was this beautiful cloth, this one that you see here. It's a commemorative cloth that is from Nigeria. And it's indigo dyed with a starch resist. So like basically it's like a cassava, which is a type of starchy root vegetable that is pressed through like what do you call it, a stencil, and then it's dipped in an indigo vat, and the starch resists the indigo.
So this cloth work, it seems to hold like a great weight of history and heavy symbolism, despite the light weight of the material.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit about the dyes as well? And then I know the next piece, I think, is the piece, the Obama piece.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you went from the first piece to the next piece, or where the inspiration kind of translated?
So one thing that fascinated me about this piece is how colonial it is. The stencil that is used to make the imagery is the bottom of a tea chest. And then the people depicted in the commemorative oval are the King and Queen of England, King George and Queen Mary. And I thought that was, I mean, to me, this is the most beautiful Adire cloth that I've ever seen. And it's like commemorating the colonial rulers that once, colonized Nigeria. And so I was thinking about if I made a commemorative cloth, which I made this before the one of my parents, what would it be? And my sister and I were together watching the election results in 2008. And we had the same exact reaction, which was that when they announced that Obama was president, we both screamed like with excitement, and then we both ducked. And so for years we're like, why did we duck? I don't understand. Like, what was that about? And it was fear. Like we were excited and then suddenly afraid at the same time. Yeah. And so on the Yoruba cloth, there's text at the bottom, which I've found a translation for it before. I think it's a proverb, but I was thinking like, what would my text be and what would my imagery be in the symbolism? And so I just basically put a short summary of what happened, how we were sitting on the second floor. We heard the announcement, and then we suddenly felt like we were a target. So there's like these mixed emotions that we had at the time. And, throughout, us feeling that Obama wasn't gonna make it through alive through his presidency, which thankfully he did. But the symbolism that I've put in it is things that have to do with his identity and my identity and American identity. And so there's the eagle and stars and stripes and the national flower of Indonesia and the flower of Hawaii. And then I've also put in these animals from Ghanaian proverbs, like the elephant. He who follows the elephant doesn't get wet. And basically the elephant leads the way and clears a path so that when you walk behind the elephant, you don't get wet from the dew in the morning. And then the crocodile the crocodile doesn't drown no matter how deep the river. And so the crocodile could either be like something sinister that won't go away, or it could also be a survivor. So there's like different meanings embedded within the cloth. And then some of the imagery just comes from the original one. Like if you look at the bottom, there's like two birds that you see. Mm-hmm. And then on mine, there's the same two birds. I just copied it.
That's wonderful. You talk a lot about, I was reading your artist statement and I was thinking about your work before this talk, and the two words that not just only came to mind, but were also in your statements and sort of about your work are the words longing and belonging. And I'm just curious about how the notions of longing and belonging function within the process of making this work. And you talked about it a little bit when you described that sensation of needing to duck. In a way, I think that is the feeling of being under attack. But also, I'm just curious sort of where you've described it a little bit, but where that comes in, and maybe some of the next pieces. I know the next piece, it might come into this. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the idea of longing that comes in my work comes from always feeling like I've never found a place that I feel like is my home. And I never feel like I belong anywhere. And I feel not exactly between two worlds, but like between multiple worlds. And I guess the belonging is like something that I always fought for, but then in the end, I've accepted life as a process of being in longing, which actually fuels a lot of what I do. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Can you talk about these pieces?
Yeah, so I was teaching textile design at Washington University one semester, and I had my students, each student had to dye 7 different types of fabric with the same exact dye, because I wanted to show them that dye has different effects on different fabric. And even like, say you have 2 cottons, but one is canvas and one is sateen, you know, then they're going to have a different, the color is going to react differently. And so then I thought about, I went to the site to buy dye for the class, and I was looking at all the colors. And when you get to black, they have all this language, like they have a link that says how to decide which black is right for you. And so you click on it, and there's like paragraphs about every single black and how difficult black is, and this black does that. And this, so I was like, whoa, this is a lot of reading about black and how difficult it is. So then I took 7 different fabrics. So I have like, I can't even remember what they all are. I wrote it. Cotton, hemp, linen. You know, there's like the really dark black is velvet, and the dye, I thought they'd be really different. And, but they're actually, these two actually ended up pretty similar. But the dye behaves differently on protein fabrics. So the purple, you know, it's not even black anymore. So I just thought, you know, it was like a simple, interesting metaphor for identity, especially because the blacks I used are called new black and better black.
Oh, wow. Interesting. And I like how these are like, visually, it does have that test strip kind of look. And I love this idea of testing out the dye to see the reaction and the meaning that goes into that. It's a really interesting project.
Thanks.
So as we start with this, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about installation. You have a lot of images that you're going to show us of installations from past exhibitions. Mm-hmm. And as an installation artist, and I don't know if you like being called that or not, I think artists, we have a hard time with categories. So, you know, I'm just saying as somebody who creates installations, can you describe, you know, a little bit about the ones you're showing us, what the settings are, but also maybe a little bit about what the ideal setting would be for you?
Yeah, this setting here is at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis in 2018, which was a great experience to have that kind of space and attention to my work, and being able to come up with like, I want this wall to be this size and the paint to be this exact color and everything to be hung this way. But the more I think about it, I have so much nautical imagery in my work that maybe something like near a shore or in a boathouse, or, you know, like a boat, what would you call it? Like a shipbuilding yard, or might be ideal in the future if I had an opportunity. I don't know. I don't feel like I've had a lot of opportunities to really make installations. And this was great because of the space. I think that triggered my thought process about creating the piece you see in the, well, maybe it's in the next slide. No. This one. Mm-hmm. Because I knew that I had all that floor space, and then I wanted the, well, I'll first explain this. So the exhibition is called Ballast, and the term ballast, you know, is like the heavy material that's put in the bottom of a ship to give it stability. And I learned that trade beads. Like my mother had always had this jar of trade beads that I played with that she got when she lived in Ghana. And so I just thought of them as like African trade beads. And later I found out that they were made in, Venice. A lot of those were made in Venice.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is another thing that has an African identity, even though it's of European origins. But they were traded in such great quantities that they can be used as ballast on the ships. And then the ballast would be replaced with human bodies. So these are both kind of things that are like metaphorically weighty and also physically weighty, to think about a whole bottom of a ship filled with beads, enough to give it stability. And beads being traded for people. So one of the things that I had seen during my travels was these kind of like bell things that were called crotals at the National Museum of Ireland. And the wall text just said crotal. And I was like, I don't know what that is. So I did some research and found out that they were ancient bells from the Bronze Age used to repel ghosts by Druid priests. And so before people entered the exhibition, I had these bells that they could ring. They're not exactly the same as the Irish ones. They have a different, like the Irish ones just had a hole in the back, and these are kind of more like a jingle bell, so that they make more noise. And I worked with a campanologist, Benjamin Sunderland, who's a campanologist in Virginia. But people could ring the bells, and they were hung on a hate blue wall, which is a color that's used in the South to repel ghosts as well. So that part of the installation was called To Repel Ghosts. And the idea was that, like, before you enter the space with this heavy history, you have a chance to repel the ghosts.
And is that the color, that blue you were talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a family of blues. So if you Google Haint Blue, Sherman-Williams and other paint companies will have like a series. They'll have like pick one of these 5, and they're all Haint Blues.
Interesting.
And then these are the works that were on the wall, and they're all batik and screen printed. And I made my own patterns to reference specific instances in St. Louis history or within my personal experience within the city. You'll see more of them.
And
so
how are they affixed to the wall?
They have grommets at the top.
Okay.
And then like a brass screw goes through it. And that way when they're loose at the bottom, so when you walk by, they can move a little bit.
Oh, I see.
And they have that kind of doubling that the Indigo Adire piece had, which is something that was done for practicality. Like there's a restriction to how wide a loom is. And then if you want fabric to be wider than that, you can sew 2 pieces together. So I did that doubling. And also there's a lot of doubling in the meaning of everything. So I wanted to reflect that in the process as well.
Now, do you think of these as paintings or prints or textiles, or how do you refer to these pieces when you speak about them? To yourself or to others?
I sometimes call them batiks, but they're not entirely, because they have other processes, but also cloth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they are cloth. And that's what, when you have pieces like this in West Africa, you would call it cloth.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And so this is what I created to reflect that history of the trade beads. There's actually a Vlisco pattern, I'll show it in the next slide, called Necklace. It has more names, but the names change depending on who you ask and where you're asking. And so it has this trade bead pattern within it. And I recreated some of those beads. Like I looked at the patterns and recreated them. So you can see it's a different colorway, the bead here. Can you see my mouth?
Yes, we can. And these are soft, and they're fabric, and they're stuffed with a soft material?
Yeah. These were stuffed with paper, but I've also shown them stuffed with, like pillow stuffing. And so this is the fabric that's made by Vlisco, the Dutch company. And then all the rest of the types of beads are ones that I created mimicking the little beads that are on the pattern.
Now, were people who came to this exhibit tempted to touch this work? It seems like it just kind of cries out to be touched, but we all know the museum etiquette, but I'm just curious.
Once you introduce the idea of like, ring these bells, then people are like, I want to touch everything. I do remember walking in once and a kid was sitting on one of I just turned around and walked the other way because I'm like, I can't see this happening.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the end, it is just a big pillow.
Well, I used to always think that sort of the test of my work in an exhibit is if children wanted to touch it or go up to it. So I think that's a good sign.
Yeah. And then I used the bead motif again here. So you see there's like throughout this pattern, there's a necklace. And this is when I, right after I lived in the Netherlands, I had been going around with that artist I mentioned, Sabina, and we saw a lot of chintzes, and they're considered traditional Dutch fabric, even though their origins are in India. So I was thinking about this again, where like through usage and it kind of claiming something starts to belong to a different culture than it is, which a lot of, you'd call it appropriation.
Right. One word for it, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of that through history, back and forth between different cultures. So what I did is I took elements from that necklace print, which is referencing the hit trade bead history, and also at the same time, through my use of it, the wax print history. And then I took motifs from different chintzes and mixed it all together, overlapping all over each other. So this is screen printed with dye on fabric.
And you use dye to screen print with, like you push dye through the screen?
Yeah, because I want the fabric to not get crunchy. Like when you print, normally screen print, it kind of has it changes the, what would you call it?
It gets stiff, kind of.
Yeah.
The pliability of the fabric gets kind of compromised.
Yeah, the hand.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. So that must be a trick to screen print using dye, because I'm guessing it's much thinner. It wants to bleed more, or can you say just a little bit about?
Sure, you just thicken it with sodium alginate, which is a seaweed. So you get like a dry powder and you add water and you make a paste, and then you just mix the dye into that and you can print with it because it's thicker. And it's kind of a gel, so it holds the dye on the fabric and it doesn't bleed that much. It's kind of amazing.
It's beautiful.
And I love the way that the colors overlap. Like if you see the way that the yellow and the blue overlap to make the green, it's like that wouldn't happen with regular screen printing.
Yeah, it's almost like a stain versus a paint, right? It kind of has a luminosity to it that's really quite lovely.
Thanks. So I did more work about the trade bead history because I have a book called The History of Beads. And it's my computer's on it right now. But it was talking about a British collector who collected a lot of beads, and he categorized them into different categories of these beads are traded for ivory, these beads are traded for slaves, these beads are traded for gold. So I was like, wow, that's really blunt. And like, what makes a particular bead traded for gold versus slaves? But chevron beads were one of the most popular. These are all different chevron beads. And so I created this piece, which is a close packing of equal spheres, which is like a mathematical term that refers to like the way that, say you're stacking oranges or something like that, or cannonballs, so that they can all fit together and support themselves in this kind of pyramid. And so I made the chevrons into this kind of cannonball arrangement here. And I had an exhibition on March 12th, which is the day before everything closed down.
So, I remember that week.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, so these are like photos from my phone. That was what I could get before everything was over. So these are some of the beads that were traded for gold. And I'm just recreating what the beads look like, but on fabric. You can see that that's what the bead looked like, and then, oops, wrong way. That. And then I have some other projects that I do, collaborations, and this was with my partner, Lyndon Barwa Jr. Every few years, we either like have an exhibition or do a project together. And so last year I put 2020, it was 2019. Last year we made this book of personal essays called Ellebo, which is elbow in Dutch. and I was taking a Dutch class, and I liked how a lot of the words were really similar to English, but like, you know, if you just read it, it looks totally different. So on the front is my nephew, and on the back is my niece. They're like stand-ins for us. And my most recent collaboration was a podcast with the Norwegian artist Anni. We were commissioned by the National Museum, and I was supposed to go to Norway, and they have a new museum opening next year. They wanted this to be like the opening program. And we ended up doing it she did it from her living room, and me from the basement of my sister's house where I was living. But basically it's in many ways an institutional critique. And we have a lot of guests from the museum, but also artists. And then we decided to kind of play with the hierarchy in the art world, and invited art students as well. So we have students give their advice on what they think the museum should be doing and how they should be reaching their public.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I'm wondering how did they sort of commission you for this or find out about you?
So the first season that we did was in the Netherlands. Anna and I were talking about how we like advice podcasts and advice columns. And then she was like, why don't we do a podcast? And so we just recorded in her studio, and it was just for fun. And like friends submitted questions asking for advice on money issues, or it all was kind of through the lens of the life of an artist. So budgeting and and then we went to Coast Contemporary, which we were commissioned to attend, which is an event in Norway where like it took place on an island. And then we went on a ship and sailed along the coast. And then we went to Bergen. Wow. But we took that opportunity to ask all the people who were there, do you want to be on our podcast? And a lot of them are curators or organizers. And so they had different perspectives, and people could ask kind of questions like, when should I have, you know, as an artist, like when should I have a kid? Or when should I start thinking about retirement? All these different life questions. And then we have different guests answer the same questions. So then 2 of the people that attended were from the National Museum of Norway, and they invited us to do the podcast, a season with them.
Wonderful. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing your work with us. I think we're going to take a few questions from our participants in the audience. And I just want to start by reminding everybody that if you go to the Q&A little icon down at the bottom of your screen, you can click on that and type in a question. And I will do my best to get to as many as I can. So first question for you, Addoley, is, I'm reading this off the screen. I admire your willingness to use new materials and local materials during artist residencies. Have you ever felt uninspired with the materials that you've had available to you?
No. I actually didn't include any images from when I went to Ghana, but that was probably one of the most exciting things, because I did brass casting, like lost wax brass casting.
Wow. That must have been amazing. So no matter how limited, you're able to kind of make use and make do. I mean, what I've seen, what you've shown, you certainly span a lot of media and a lot of different materials. So it sounds like you can kind of scavenge to find what you need to make your work.
But then I just realized all the times that I've done that has been abroad. Oh. And when I'm working in the US, maybe that's when I struggle, because I don't know why, but that's when I tend to do something like about the history of beads, or, you know, not about the specific place where I am. But I mean, I guess I always do incorporate something about the place where I am.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So it's not always totally specific to where maybe your studio practice is, but some of the places that you travel or go to. Okay, another question was, you seem to be constantly curious about new processes and ways to make artwork. Are there any processes you plan on using in your work in the future that you're excited to learn about, or anything that you don't know about yet that you're excited to try?
I've been applying for glass residencies. I'm like doing something about the history of, you know, like glass beads, and it would be interesting to make something actually out of glass.
Absolutely.
I've worked with ceramics. I don't think I had anything in here before with ceramics, but that's something I would like to do more too.
Yeah, absolutely. One person is asking, where's the podcast? Could you tell us a little bit? So if anybody can watch it or hear it?
Yeah, you can
I
just
guess
search.
hear it. It's a podcast. Yeah.
You can just search Ask Addoley and Anna is the name of the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And the good thing is my name is, I can just use my first name a lot because it's not common. So it should be easy to find if you just look up Addoley podcast.
Okay. And then Alice is asking, is there a work or series that you would want to go back to and explore more deeply?
Hi, Alice. There's a series I did. Well, it's not a series. I just made two. So when I went to Iceland, there were these breadboards that I saw in museums, and they were from the Danish time of Iceland. Where Danish was used a lot. And so they have text that's backwards on them. And they were, you would bake bread, and then the bread would have the text on it, like printmaking, where it's the reverse, and then you can read it on the bread.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so I loved that so much, and I love the way they look. They're made out of wood. So I made two that are ceramic, and I tested it on bread. It didn't work so well, but I think I would like to do that again because I like using proverbs and symbolism, and I had both on there. They were both like proverbs about traveling.
Oh, yeah. Very cool. There's a question out there. How does scale function in your artwork? And that was one that I was thinking as well, or curious about. It seems like you work fairly large, at least for printmaking and some of your sculpture, but how do you make decisions regarding scale?
I think that my work was able to get larger because I started to realize that I need to be able to store it easily. And you can have a huge wall piece that's made out of fabric and fold it and put it in a backpack and walk away. And so I wanted like that whole entire exhibition with the bells and everything, just, it fits in like a couple small boxes and all the cloths can fit like in my backpack. So a lot of that has to do with mobility, and even constructing the beads. I made them so that they have a zipper and you can take out the stuffing. It's not a permanent thing, and you can lay them flat and transport them. Mm-hmm. So whenever I think about scale, I'm always thinking about the ability to store the work. And because I move, at least in the past few years, I move a lot, and it becomes burdensome to have anything heavy or large. And so that's part of, like my lifestyle plays into the work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We have someone, Jean Golden, she's asking, she says, I very much enjoyed hearing about your creative process. And I'm wondering if you would consider going deeper into the concern you mentioned about being afraid for Obama when he rose to power. So if you would consider developing within the work or making a work about that, is that something you would revisit again?
I'm planning on making another piece like that for this election, hopefully before it. Not commemorating the president this time. But I don't know, there's some things, they just come out at the right time. And that was one of those things that I'd been thinking about for years, because, that happened in 2008, and then I made the piece in 2017. I don't know what more I would say, because I still don't understand what I felt beyond just being scared. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how rational it was to duck. Like, was someone going to shoot us? I don't know, just irrational. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is sort of a last question, and there are a couple of questions related to this. I'm going to kind of wrap them all together, but people are asking a lot about how do you do your research? And that's a word that visual artists use a lot, but I think it's important to for people to think about how does research tie into the process of being creative. So what methods do you use to do research? Does the research happen first and then the process comes in later, or vice versa? You talked a little bit about that with the pieces about the ships and the color panels with the words, and you kind of made that connection as you were working. But can you talk a little bit about how you typically do your research?
Yeah, I think my research is more visual than anything else. And I think sometimes it comes before, but sometimes there's already like, I know a little bit about something, and then I learn more, and through that I get more ideas, or just I learn more so that I can talk about it. Or, you know, like in the process of learning about beads, I knew the basic, like, you know, I had learned, oh, beads were used to trade for people. And that was enough for me to make that piece. But then as I was moving on, it was like, well, what were the beads that people wanted? Why did they want them? What was so special about them? Who took advantage of this? Like even missionaries would go to Africa with their pockets full of beads and be rich because of it. They're so valued.
Yeah.
So it was just very exploitive. And yeah, research wise, I mean, I tend to get fixated on something for a very short, you can see it in my work because I get fixated on something for a short period of time. And then I'm like, what's that? I'm like interested in something else or a different process. So I wouldn't be like as much of a researcher as like my friend Sabina is. You know, she knows one thing really, really well, and she can tell you like all about it detailed. Where me, like I might have to go back to my notes or look something up, but I can tell you a generalized history of something.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And I was going to end there, but there are two questions that just popped up. One, some of them fairly short. One of them is, do you do all your own sewing?
Yeah, well, I do, but also my partner Lyndon, when I was sewing for the beads, they took so long that every week he would make 2 of them. And so he learned how to sew through that.
Ah.
But just, yeah, me and him are the sewers.
Okay. And then last question, I think this is a really important kind of technical one. It seems like grants have played an important role in supporting your work. This is from Patricia. What other resources would you recommend for emerging artists? She works small scale, but would really like to go bigger.
Other methods of support?
Or how do grants, tell us a little bit about how you find that funding to help support you.
That's actually a big part of, I mean, until the coronavirus, because now I'm kind of lazy, to be honest. But I was always applying to things, and I have deadlines, and then if I don't get it, I have an automatic calendar update that will pop up a year from then and tell me to apply again. And then I think one of the most important skills is writing. So if you're not good at writing, to have a friend who is, edit your statement, or just look over what you're proposing. Because after a while it becomes obvious because I've been on, you know, panels deciding who gets grants, it becomes obvious what's a good proposal and what feels weak or missing information. And Lyndon and I are always proofreading each other's stuff. So I have like a person at home that does that for me, and vice versa.
That's very handy. That's very handy.
In terms of other funding, when I first started going to residencies, I was going to ones that you had to pay for, and I didn't have money. So I did a Kickstarter for one of them, and that, I mean, making the rewards for a Kickstarter is a little bit painful, but that was how I was able to go, and that led into other opportunities. You can do like a small series, and then people who are in your network can purchase your work, like an affordable, you know, I did that with a print, and then that gives you money to keep going. But I think with grants, you have to apply to a lot, because, you know, I'll have a list of like, oh, I applied to 20 things in the past few months, and then I got one. Or like when I went to the fabric workshop, that was the only thing I got that year, and I had applied to so many opportunities, but it ended up being one of the best things that I've done.
That's a really great thing to remind everybody of, that, you know, there are a lot, as artists, there are a lot of failures, and there are a lot of moments of rejection, and we have to get past those and find those little opportunities that pop up. It can be a tough road, but it's also really, like you said, that one opportunity really like changed your life. And I find that that's really important, to have that kind of patience and perseverance.
And you have to be good with rejection, just like whatever, just brush it off and not take it personally too much. I mean, sometimes you'd be upset because you really wanted something, but it's just part of the lifestyle to be rejected.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you, Addoley, for such a wonderful talk. I learned so much more about you, and I'm so thrilled that you're going to be coming to the ranch next summer. So thank you so much. It was just a wonderful experience, and thank you for being so generous and sharing with us today.
Thank you.
I do want to let everybody know that we have another virtual art salon November 3rd at 4 p.m. Mountain Time with photographer and artist Nydia Blas-Boyd. So please join in on that. She will be interviewed by Andrea Wallace. And I just wanted to also let you know that if you are interested in watching one of these virtual art salons or sharing it with a friend later on, you can find them all on YouTube just by Googling the name of the artist and putting in Anderson Ranch Art Center, or you can find them on our website, andersonranch.org. And we are going to sign out. Everyone's writing comments. Thank you so much. Wonderful job. They enjoyed this. So again, Addoley, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's a wonderful conversation. And for now, I'll sign off and say good night to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.